Hello again, gamers. Welcome back to the Board Game Captain. I'm the Captain, and today I'm going to be reviewing and talking about The Very Good Dogs of Chernobyl. Now, this is a game published by the people over at Ninth Level Games. It's part of their Polymorph line of games that'll use the basic Polymorph system, which changes slightly from game to game, but is, if you've played one of them, you know the gist. And I want to give a big thank you to the people at Ninth Level Games for this free copy of The Very Good Dogs of Chernobyl to check out and use in my games and also to review. So thank you very much for this copy of The Very Good Dogs of Chernobyl. Before we get too into this, I do want to say I've got a ton of links in the description down below that you can check out at your leisure. There's a link to BoardGameCaptain.com, which is a great hub for all things Board Game Captain. There's also a link to my Teespring store where you can get some cool t-shirts or mugs, etc. Like this t-shirt here that says, I drink and I game, it's what I do, and it has a D20 and a mug of beer on it. This and other items are available over on my Teespring store. And if you're in a position to and like to support the channel, there is a link to my Patreon also in the description down below. All right, so The Very Good Dogs of Chernobyl. So what is this? So again, this is a zine-sized role-playing game. Now, I did a review of one of the other role-playing games of theirs. Again, another zine-sized role-playing game called Mazes. I'll put a link up above here if you want to check out that review. That was a standard kind of old school Renaissance styled fantasy sword and sorcery sort of role-playing game. This is a more modern themed sort of horror game where you play as dogs in the aftermath of the Chernobyl disaster. Now, in this one, in this world that you're playing in, the Chernobyl disaster happened, but in addition to being a big radioactive meltdown of a nuclear power plant, the disaster punched a hole in reality to another dimension and let some sort of great old one, think the great old ones from the Call of Cthulhu, H.P. Lovecraft mythos, one of them started to try to come through. Now, the encasing the whole site in concrete like they really did in the real world stopped it from fully coming through and manifesting in our world, but it was still able to reach through and influence things here, and some lesser entities did come through and are causing havoc in the area around Chernobyl. After the area gets evacuated, the pets of the people who used to live there are left behind, and you play either some of those pets or the descendants of some of those pets that are going on kind of horror adventure themed stories in that area as you fight strange creatures and explore and investigate strange phenomena that are happening in the surrounding area while also trying to avoid radioactive hot zones. So, all right, let's talk about a little bit about what's in this book when you get this book. Now, as you can see, it's fairly small. It is a kind of glue binding zine. The previous game I had already reviewed, Mazes, had a staple binding. It was separated into 4 smaller zines. These glue bindings I'm not a huge fan of. I have had games with this kind of glue binding where they've come apart. This particular one, I've read through it all once and I haven't noticed any real issues yet, but yeah, this is not my favorite way to generally bind one of these small role-playing games. That said, it is a very affordable role-playing game, being soft cover and such, so that, you know, that does help mitigate the issues with the fact that they used a cheaper method for binding. So it starts off with the basic introduction story of exactly what happened from the dog's perspective. The dogs of Chernobyl have developed a telepathic ability to communicate in their minds to each other. And they are intelligent enough, like I said, to go on these adventures. You can kind of think of this universe as being like a storyline where you have anthropomorphized animals, something similar to, say, The Wind in the Willows or the book Call of the Wild, but crossed with something like Stranger Things or the old, again, Cthulhu mythos stories from H.P. Lovecraft, which is a really interesting concept. So it goes over some general ways to make sure that everybody is okay with the kind of things you're playing, some different techniques. They put these in the start of all the role-playing games. I've read a few of them now. And some ways to make sure that, you know, you're not crossing the line with people. You want to make sure that everybody's going to be comfortable with the sort of story you're going to tell, and that is good advice. There's a very brief section here, very brief, on how a role-playing game is run. They don't spend a lot of time on it. They're kind of expecting you to have already played some role-playing games before you got this one. Even though it's a fairly rules-light system, they're not expecting this to be the first role-playing game you ever play, as they are kind of a niche hobby game company that usually you would need to already be into gaming to know they exist. Then they start going over what you need to play and the basics of the system. So the basics of the polymorph system, which is a very interesting system, is that in addition to character classes, or in the case of this game, breeds, because instead of character classes, this game has dog breeds. But in addition to that, you have rolls, and the roll picks what size die you use. A D4, D6, D8, or D10. And the thing is, whatever roll you choose, that's the die you're using for every roll from then on. And then there are character sheets in the back that show you that whether you're rolling for something that would fall under the categories of senses, running, tooth and claw, or heart, there are different sets of numbers that are successes, and therefore different die types are better at different things. So senses, you get a success on a 2 or a 3, whereas heart, which is all the way on the other end, you get a success on a 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. And they all run between those. You've got 2 and a 3 for senses, 3, 4, and 5 for running, 4, 5, 6, and 7 for tooth and claw, and 5 through 9 for heart. So, a roll that gives you a D10 would be the best at heart rolls, while a roll that gives you a D4 would be best at senses rolls. This is a system where the game master never rolls. You have rolls for actions you take, and you have rolls for saves. If an enemy attacks you, you roll for the save. It's only you rolling. The game master never ever rolls. Now, there are cases of whether you have a advantage or disadvantage, and in these cases, you will roll a second die of the appropriate type. In the case of an advantage, you roll a second die and you take the better of the 2 dice. In the case of a disadvantage, you roll 2 dice and you have to succeed on both of them to succeed on the test. Now, there's no hit points in this. This one is meant to be a bit more abstract than the other game I had already reviewed, Mazes, because there's not really hit points and there's not really stats for the enemies. It's a much more theater of the mind, free-flowing kind of game. Definitely a bit more abstract. Now, after we get through the basics of the system here, next we have a area where they go over the rolls. So the Elder is the roll where you get the D4. The Corsair is a roll Corsair is a roll where you get a D6. This is supposed to be a more speedy character, something that you could think of in other role-playing games as sort of like a rogue or a ranger, whereas the Elder is like a leader. The Hunter is the next role, which is a very combat-oriented role, and the Guard is like a tank. They're the tough role. After that, we have some more rules on how the specific types of roles are run in the game, on senses, running, tooth and claw, heart, and also on the calling and instinct. So the calling is something that allows you to succeed at things that your type of character should succeed at. And in this case, it allows you to succeed on a roll of a 1 as well as the other numbers, whereas the instinct is something that is based on what generation you're born into. And this is something that's a little different for this role-playing game versus some of the other polymorph games. I like this one a lot. So there are 3 generations based on when you were born. If you were born before the event, if you're one of the older dogs, you are the generation of wise. Now, wise dogs generally succeed more at skills that a human would be good at because they're more in tune with the human world. So because of this, the top roll of the die will automatically be a success. The top number being a 4 for a D4, a 6 for a D6, regardless of what they're rolling for, will be a success if you are wise and doing something that a human would be good at. Now, the next generation, ones born right before the event, when the nuclear reactor went and melted down, are the weird. Now, the weird generation succeed on their top roll of their die in tasks that the monsters would be good at, strange things, understanding strange phenomenon. Whereas the more recent generation, the youngest dogs, are the wild. These are ones that have grown up basically as wild animals, and they succeed better at things that wild animals would succeed at. This is a really cool mechanic, and it allows you to have a more varied party where some of the party are really good at certain types of tasks, while others are really good at other types of tasks, which is really cool and gives you something to be really good at other than just the type of thing that you'd be good at for your breed or role, etc. Then they have a section goes over danger. You slowly build up danger as enemies get revealed, or if you do silly things and make poor decisions. And eventually, you periodically will, as you gain danger, you have to roll and try to roll above your danger. But if you roll below it, something bad will have to happen. And then you get to drain all your danger away. You clear it out. Sometimes if you roll the exact number of your danger, you get to pierce the veil and you get to understand a little bit about what's really going on behind the scenes before you clear your danger away, which is really cool. Then they have a whole section on creating your very good dog. Now this includes both character creation and then the different breeds of dogs, and there's quite a few different breeds. They don't just have like small dog, medium dog, large dog. They have multiple different small dog breeds, so you can really flavor it well. I like the art style. They have this interesting kind of filtered photos that are behind some of the words or sometimes next to some of the words, which I'm probably showing some of the pictures up on screen, but it's really neat, especially for a low budget RPG, a good way to get some cool images in the background, which is really nice. One thing I do want to draw attention to is there is no progression mechanics in this game. There's no experience, no levels. This is obviously meant to be a game that's meant to be played either for one-offs or for short self-contained campaigns, as there is no advancement in it. Then they have the calling, so you can decide kind of what type of dog you are, whether you're an alpha, a fighter, a guide, a mascot, a rescuer, scrounger, shadow, shepherd, witch. Then they have edges. Now the edges are decided basically by what your breed and what your calling are. They tell you what edges you have access to, and you get to pick a couple of the edges. And these are things that you're extra good at. So a normal thing, for instance, for being agile or alert, brave, charming, clever, curious, fast, free, friendly, gentle, hurting, etc. There's a ton of them. Something you would be normally good at that you should succeed at, you don't even need to roll for. And then if you do need to roll for it, you get to usually count your 1 as a success as well. So even if you do need to roll for it, you have a better chance of succeeding with it as well. Then they have some examples of character creation, a whole pack of dogs that they have created, which are actually very enjoyable to read through. I really like these sample dogs. Then we've got some how to run a game in this world for the game master, which they call the MC, followed by some in-depth examples of what the different areas around Chernobyl are like, the areas you might wind up adventuring in, what's going on there, as well as some plot hooks to get you involved in the strange goings-on or investigating monsters or strange phenomenon in the area around Chernobyl. And then followed by, just like all old school RPGs always had, the character sheets in the back, though they do tell you the character sheets are available for free on their website to download. They have a different character sheet for each of the different roles. So you have the Elder, the Corsair, the Hunter, and the Guard all in the back there. Yeah, so this is a very nice little self-contained role-playing game. And I really like this. Now, some downsides. Let's start with some downsides so I can finish on the positive. So a downside is there is no advancement system. I would have liked an advancement system so you could have done a more ongoing campaign with this, but you could easily, if you have, for instance, mazes, you could adopt the advancement system for mazes into this to have you slowly gain, say, extra edges, extra little perks, if you will. If you want to, you could definitely do that if you had both. Now, this game, though, itself is obviously not really meant for that. It's a minor gripe. Also, there's no hit points as well, so combat is done much more in the abstract. Minor gripe, if you really like to do bookkeeping and keeping track of wounds and things like that, this is not, the game for you. Now, on a positive note, I love how streamlined this system is. It is obviously meant to be very theater of the mind, very cool, very, instead of doing hit points, you attack a monster, you roll to see if you succeed, and then the game master tells you what happens. Did you attack them on a catwalk? Do you knock them over the rail? Do they go falling down? Did you attack them way too early in the story and that monster is supposed to be reoccurring? The game master is going to be like, well, you wound them and they run away so that they can come back. So like I say, it's a much more kind of free-flowing sort of system in that way. Very rules light, very easy to teach people how to play. If you are an experienced game master, this is a really good game actually to play with new role players. Like I said before, it's not good for a new person who's just reading it because there's not a huge amount of explanation of how to run a role-playing game here. There's a little bit of an explanation, but not a lot. But it's actually a really good system to introduce other people to role-playing if you are already experienced, which is kind of interesting. Also, I love this world. This is an incredibly unique and interesting world to put the polymorph system in. I absolutely adore this world. I love how it reminds me of things like Watership Down, but replacing the rabbits with dogs. A lot of the characters in here, as I was reading them, I was thinking of them as characters from Watership Down, which I'm a huge fan of. So I really, really liked that. I think this is a great game system to either run one-off games at parties or at conventions, short campaigns, or maybe to be one to do, again, this is a great system to use for backup games on game night when some of your players couldn't show up and it was going to be a big important game and you don't want to just run it without them. So instead you're like, you know what? I've got this backup system. Let's do some one-offs. I can quickly throw some characters together because character creation in this can be done in like 15 minutes. You can get a whole party of characters made up and just run a game. And that is really, really awesome. If you've already done some thinking about it, being like, well, what kind of game would I run? Because you have no need of actually taking the time to write out and stat out NPCs or monsters. It's all done in a very abstract method. Yeah, I really enjoy this. I think of the ones I've read so far, I have a few others I've read. I haven't gotten to do the reviews on them yet. But of all the ones I've read so far, spoiler alert, this is my favorite. This ever so slightly beats out Mazes for my favorite of the polymorph system I have read so far. There are still a few I haven't read, so I'm not saying that all the rest of the ones they've sent me are going to be lower than this. But the ones I've read so far are not as good as this one. This is the best, in my opinion. Really, really like this. And one of the things I think really pushes it over the top for me is the uniqueness of the setting, because it is just so cool and unique, and I love it so much. And that is why I'm going to give The Very Good Dogs of Chernobyl 8.5 stars out of 10. This game is fantastic, and it is really good for the incredibly affordable nature of this product to be able to just sort of pick it up on a whim at a game convention when you see their table there. If you remember this video, I would recommend getting this and checking it out. This is really, really awesome. Yes. So there you go. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns on this video or on this role-playing game, feel free to put them in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this review of a role-playing product and you'd like to see me do more like it, be sure to give it a like, share it on all forms of social media, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Board Game Captain. That's Captain spelled with a K on YouTube. And until next time, game on.